I've heard this is already occurring in places like Canada, in the British Columbia, where these animal rights groups have bid on leases and created non-uses closed off to bear hunting. This is already happening to our neighbors in the north. Your listeners can Google. I'm not making this up out of thin air. Like, this is already happening and being tested in other countries. So that's what I'm worried about, this model, our model being upended, especially if you support public land hunting and access and multiple uses. That model needs to continue. We have people in energy development and in grazing and farming and these so-called extractive industries. They also go fishing and hunting too. Why would they want to ruin their environment and their surroundings as well?
Tejas. Tejas Hunt Club Podcast is the podcast for you and you and you and you.
Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of the Tejas Hunt Club podcast. Today you're going to have myself, Megan McElgay, as well as Gabriella Hoffman, an award-winning outdoor writer and also a podcaster and a board of director on POMA's board. I believe she also serves as their secretary. Today we'll be diving into how she got started in the outdoors. She has been around firearms and fishing a majority of her life, but she also got started into hunting recently in her adulthood. So sharing a little bit about herself and what she does in her profession. She spends a lot of time in politics and advocating for conservation efforts across the U.S. And she shares a little bit with us about how that affects Texans specifically, and things that are happening on our coast and within our land, and also what we can do about it and how we can speak up and use our voices to make an impact on conservation efforts. A couple different things we've posted recently. We have our POMA Range Day video up on YouTube. That's always a fun one to see all the corporate partners from the POMA conference, which you'll learn a little bit more about. That's the Professional Outdoor Media Association, if you haven't already heard on previous podcasts. So we have a recap of our Range Day with them, trying out all kinds of firearms, some automatic firearms, basically just having a blast with all of the members that attended that conference. So be sure to check that out. We also have a fishing video with Barrett Garrison coming out, as well as a podcast. So be sure to check that on YouTube and on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we have a second fishing video coming out on July 9th. So we have a two-part series from our trip with him this past weekend. We caught some really, really gorgeous redfish, and definitely casted a few more that never got close to redfish, but it's been a fun trip with him every time we go down there. So make sure you go watch that. As Brandon already mentioned, we are also headed to the Texas Wildlife Association Wildlife Convention, and that's going to be held in San Antonio. We will be attending on July 15th on a Saturday. We have a luncheon to attend that day, hopefully get some great networking opportunities, and then we'll also be attending the auction and dinner that night. Stay up to date on all things Tejas Hunt Club. We have social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. For Facebook, we do have a private group that you can request to join where you'll see posts from our little community that we've created there. On Instagram, you can see that Brandon and I both have personal profiles. I'm going to give mine. So mine's Megan Elise TX on Instagram. And then also, of course, the YouTube channel, that's a huge one. We will be posting all of our podcast videos, as well as our adventures, like I said, with Barrett, any kind of vlogging that we do on our hunting trips, and then all of our summer activities are on there as well. So be sure to check that out. And if you haven't already seen our rodeo videos, those are fun to watch as well. So without further ado, I'm going to dive in with Gabriella and let her tell you all about her story.
Megan, it is so great to join you on the Tejas Hunt Club podcast. And I loved connecting with you and Brandon several years ago. I was really impressed. I don't know, maybe it was like the Instagram algorithm that first led me to find your guys' content. Maybe one of your rodeo videos. Was super impressed. And I was like, we need more Texans in POMA. We need more young people who do outdoor activities, but are also involved in similar industries like rodeo or ranching, in those kind of sectors of, or kind of similar sectors to the outdoor industry, where there are a lot of adjacent commonalities and adjacent kind of overlaps and themes that you find over there. So I was like, we don't have people who are working overtly in rodeo, and we are missing out on people. So I was like, I got to recruit y'all. And I did. And I'm so grateful because it seems like you both have grown tremendously. You've made a lot of contacts. I believe it's helped you business-wise, and you've networked, made friends. We've become friends along the way through your guys' involvement with our organization. And so I hope it's been a resource for you. And moving forward, we expect to grow and expand and really just continue upon some of the building and rebuilding that we've been doing since the COVID pandemic. So very good to connect with you there and talk to you today about kind of my story. I'll keep it very condensed because I have a lot of things I could share, but my background, I didn't come to the outdoors randomly, believe it or not. I think people think because I'm an adult onset hunter, every other outdoor activity I've partaken in is something I've done in adult life, and that's not true. I first began fishing when I was 8 years old. My father roped me into the activity. It was our way of bonding. It's a way that we still bond today, to this very day, even though I'm in my 30s and he's getting older. It's our way of relaxing, bonding, father-daughter time. And I learned a lot of valuable life lessons fishing with my dad. He would take me to this charter in Dana Point, California, in Orange County, California, Southern California, where I'm from originally. And I spent 21 years of my life. And it was against the backdrop of the Pacific Ocean and also inland fishing opportunities where I really learned and developed my love of the outdoors, first with fishing and then obviously camping and national parks. I went to my first national park, I think when I was 8 or 9 years old. It was 1999, 2000, sometime around then. And we vacationed. My parents were always very keen about us spending time outdoors. We had Disneyland in our backyard, but they were like, we don't want you to go to Disneyland. You know, maybe there are some corruptible things that could happen there.
Diversify, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, this was old Disney before the Disney of today, but it was just too commercialized, too packed, too busy. And it's very industrialized. And a few trips there were great. Like, it was great as a kid. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I had fun with friends too. But there wasn't that same kind of mystery and intrigue at Disneyland that I found at national parks. So my parents decided, instead of vacationing at Disneyland or going there every single weekend, because a lot of my friends had weekend passes, and I used to go to the beach. I would always go to the beach too. So I would get my outdoor time locally, going to the beach, hiking in nearby parks, lakes, etc. But I think the national park experience too, and vacationing there in the ones in California, and then even beyond those in California, I recall having fond memories of going to the Grand Canyon, Grand Teton National Park, Yellowstone, Bryce Canyon, Zion. My parents took me to amazing places, and I will forever cherish those memories and places even as an adult. And I've got to revisit some of those places now in my 30s and my late 20s. And it's a little different because as a kid, you remember things a little differently, process the experience in a different manner. But I kind of remember there's certain things I recall, and my memory gets jogged when I go to these places again. And time in the outdoors, both from fishing and going to national parks. And then as I became older, it was in college, my first year of college, I was very interested in doing shooting sports. I never had an animus to guns. I never was opposed to the Second Amendment. Actually, my cultural background, my family is from the former Soviet Union, kind of led me to take an interest in it and even have an inert, kind of hidden interest in it that was sitting dormant because of my family history. And if you had family that lived under some sort of totalitarian regime, the common refrain about mistakes not to repeat from these regimes and in these countries that were formerly occupied is, what did the people who were in charge do initially? First, they usually disarmed the populace. And we had learned a little bit in my family history recently. I got more updated information, more accurate information about why my grandpa was imprisoned in a gulag. And my grandpa, who was a Lithuanian Catholic gentleman, he was belonging to, I believe he belonged to like some, independent militia, like nothing scary, but like a private gun club, but it was viewed as like a militia. And when it was both occupied by the Nazis and then the Soviets, first the Soviets, then the Nazis, and then back to the Soviets, they didn't like this type of underground, so-called underground independent activity.
Of course they didn't. Right.
So I found out that
control it.
Right. So he was a gun owner. It is confirmed. Now I kind of like believed he was, but I wasn't certain. But my mom got confirmation that his imprisonment first in a German labor camp was because he was a gun owner. And then I found out for other reasons why he was in a Russian labor camp for 18 months. But the imprisonment in the German work camp was because he was a gun owner. Crazy stuff. But I'd heard from reading even texts and other materials, even outside of anecdotes and stories from my own family and from what I've heard from secondhand, thirdhand accounts of those my parents encountered. And you read history books that disarming a populace was the first step to enacting totalitarian policies. And so for me, I understood, like, historically speaking, and the unique nature of the Second Amendment here in this country. And so for me, I was always kind of open to it, but there was never the option to access it. My parents couldn't afford firearms. I don't think, like, my parents were working all the time. My mom was working in corporate America for a time, got laid off from her profession. There were a lot of layoffs in her industry. So it was kind of hard for her to make certain money. She wasn't into guns. My dad was more into it, and he was always kind of struggling 2008 was really hard. And so it really kind of set back in 2012, set back my family financially. So there was never going to be any affording of guns. And also it was kind of like a taboo activity, even in Orange County, which is considered like, a gun friendly place. So for my parents, there was no proximity, even though they knew that gun control was bad. And I think I'm grateful that it took being, a 19, 18-year-old female in college, having acquaintances and friends who had firearms and said, why don't you go shooting with us? It'll be a good experience. We'll teach you how to do it. It was in like public lands in the San Bernardino Mountains. I was like, okay, sure. I'm open to it. I'm not opposed to it. It's a little scary to handle this. So for me, I did that. I overcame whatever initial fears I had. And I was very turned off by recoil. I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to try this again, but I wasn't totally opposed to it. It was interesting. And it took maybe a few years later when I graduated college in 2012, moving to the East Coast, Virginia, where I call home now, befriending people through politics and my other lines of work who said, why don't we take you to the range? Why don't you build upon the experiences you had previously in California? Maybe it'll be a better experience. And I learned that it was through friends that I had who took me to the range. They had membership and were able to get me in for free, or I paid like a small nominal fee, nothing too pricey. And then I learned shooting beyond like shotguns and handguns. I learned about Armalite rifles, AR-15s, which are misinterpreted as assault weapons. And that's not the case. Mechanically,
AR does not stand for assault rifle.
And so through being kind of exposed to firearms more, I learned about the mechanics. I learned about the different terminology. I learned how to grip my hands more properly and accurately to ensure that I would not have recoil. I would obviously have more improved accuracy, have a more comfortable shooting experience. And that's what it takes with exposure. So I guess I've been shooting guns now since 2010 on and off. And before I purchased my first gun or was gifted my first gun from my dad, I first got my concealed carry permit. I kind of did the reverse of what most people, especially new gun owners, do. I think it was 2014, 2015 when I first applied for my concealed carry permit, even in my county in Northern Virginia, which is not very friendly to the Second Amendment. But my state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, is pretty gun friendly, believe it or not. Even though there has been some gun control recently enacted, we hope to repeal it, hopefully in the upcoming legislature if they change kind of the makeup there to a more pro-gun majority. It's kind of divided now with pro-gun majorities, and then you have one chamber that is not. But got to shoot more, got more exposure, started covering the issue. And then, like I said, after going to SHOT Show, getting my concealed carry permit, being gifted a handgun, my dad and I got our CHP permits together because I wanted to make sure I was educated enough in it before I purchased a gun. And I was very indecisive, like, what make do I want? So I settled on a Smith & Wesson.
That's actually a really good point because and I'm coming from the opposite direction where I'm still trying to figure out, I don't have my concealed carry yet, but it's a little, in Texas,
constitutional carry now. Yeah.
Yes. So it's a little bit different here. But I have done the opposite. So I've been around guns my entire life, but I've just now started to get comfortable enough to be able to have a pistol in my truck or like be choosing what I might concealed carry or what I might carry open carry. And it's actually really refreshing to hear you say, well, it's actually my duty to be educated. And I think that's a great way to look at that.
As a writer and journalist, I think safety is the most paramount tip and piece of advice and kind of point you want to hone in to readers. So I always stress to readers on my podcast, listeners on my podcast, readers for my blogs and in my reporting work that safety is paramount and you should know how to properly handle a gun. Make sure you're pointing it in the right direction and not pointing it in the incorrect direction, making sure to check if it's loaded, unloaded, and that you're just remembering the basic practical skills, the 4 shooting tips and basic measures you should know. I think there are 4
and
basic.
Some people, and it sounds like and people are listening to this, if you've never gotten into it, or if you have, you probably understand this, but it sounds so simple. Of course, make sure it's not loaded. Of course, make sure you're not pointing in the wrong direction, but it really isn't. When you're in the field, it's something that it can't be second nature. It has to be front of mind. It has to be something that you have developed good habits with handling your firearms. So it's like I said, it sounds like not a big deal. It sounds like a well, duh moment, but you'll be surprised how many accidents happen with firearms with people who are extremely experienced and they either aren't paying attention or they're distracted or, whatever it may look like. It happens all the time.
You see on social media all the time, and I wish people would not share. I understand for an educational purpose why people do share it, but it could create copycats. And I don't like it when people are exhibiting that, and someone can be taught to correct those mistakes. Maybe that could be a teachable moment in that respect. Maybe not to shame people unless they're really doing something bizarre that is like warrant of intervention, and having them step aside and be like, you need to polish your technique. You need to change and retool what you're doing, because you could injure someone. You can injure yourself, most of all, and those around you, and injure people. You don't want to do that. And so for me, yeah, I did the concealed carry process first, then got my gun on my 25th birthday. And then after becoming comfortable with firearms, reporting on firearms, I segued into hunting. I never, again, was opposed to hunting. I just didn't have immediate proximity to these activities. Again, my parents were working. It was very costly. I was maybe unaware, and maybe it's the fault of my former game department. California's game department never really advertised fish or hunting opportunities, because early on, I was looking back at when certain prohibitions were made and instituted in California for different forms of hunting. Mountain lion hunting was prohibited in 1990, and they've probably had some other similar restrictions too about what components you can use as well. And so to me, it seemed like gradually the game department was shifting away. When I'm analyzing why it's in the precarious situation it is California in terms of conservation and hunting and fishing, the game department shifted away because you had fewer people who were representative of the hook and bullet crowd. And it's now especially influenced by those who are very removed from these processes and activities, and they want to have conservation divorced from hunters and anglers, or rather hunters and anglers divorced from conservation. So those people are stacked on these game agencies. And then they were complaining, why are we having a shortage of hunters? We need these monies to be replenished. And so for me, I think I fault my former game department for not, having those resources available. This was also pre-internet or pre-social media days. And so they weren't really advertising it as well. But like I said, being in kind of my own world, I was studying, I was a kid, I was enjoying the outdoors, never really had time for hunting. Like I said, I grew up fishing, started at 8, got very seriously into it by the time I was 12. I hooked in a very consequential catfish, even in this like kiddie pond in a nearby, like the Santa Ana River lakes. They had trout, they had catfish. And so my dad and I would go there for practice because we're like, oh, we can eat this. And, it's farm raised, whatever, get practice. And so it was a consequential turning point for me, Memorial Day 2003. I think it's actually 20 years since I had this consequential fishing experience just this past recent Memorial Day. Believe it or not, I totally missed that. I couldn't find the picture. We had the picture in a Polaroid form, but the place that I fished from, I don't think they have the archives from that far back. And my parents couldn't find the picture, unfortunately, but that's okay. You can trust me when I'm talking about this fishtail. I know the measurements. It was an 8.9 pound catfish. It was measuring like 18 and a half inches long, or 21 and a half inches long. I forget the exact measurement. So it was pretty long, over 20 inches, give or take. And it was a huge catfish for like me being a little girl.
You're tiny. Yeah.
Tiny, yeah. 5'3", 5'4". And so I was so excited. I beamed with pride. My dad was talking to someone. And I was like, Dad, I need help reeling. Please help me. And because I wasn't used to such a girth and the strength and the force that this fish had. Now I can reel in those fish comfortably because I'm bigger, stronger, etc. And so my fishing interest plus this then adoption of shooting sports and learning how to handle firearms safely led me to want to do hunting, because I was like, I'm self-employed now. When I was working for someone else, you have far less latitude kind of to do your own thing. And now that I set my own schedule, do my own things, I had opportunities when I was first starting up my freelancing business. I had opportunities to take hunter's education. Now I don't think I'd be able to take it if I wasn't already doing hunting. So I wanted to get it out of the way early on in my freelancing career because I knew I was interested in doing this. I saw there was a need to supplement fishing, because there are periods of time where you can go fishing. Trout fishing is usually from October, November till about April, May. And then you have the summer months. And again, most hunting opportunities, except for like predators, are not available during the summer. Pretty obvious. Follow your hunting regulation guidebook. But you could still help cull invasive species or coyotes or pigs. So there is a summer hunting season, of course. And so for me, in periods where I felt that there isn't fishing, or maybe fishing I could do and then simultaneously also go hunting, I was like, I want to kind of become more well-rounded. I want to be more versatile. If I'm writing about hunting and fishing and conservation and the policy that affects it, and then also how that ties into excise taxes and guns and ammunition, I need to actually be immersed in these activities. I'm already immersed in these activities with respect to fishing. So I kind of know a little bit about fishing, I would say, early in my career. Now I was like, I'm totally missing out on the personal dynamics, the personal experience that I can trace back to my writing, not just put out, platitudes or theoretical information
Mm-hmm.
that I haven't been able to try and test in the real world. And so I was like, okay, I have to do this. Again, I wasn't scared, and the online course was great, super easy to do. I was able to complete it within a week because I had a lot of free time, like I said, early in my freelancing career, because I wasn't really having constant work. It was really short term, small gigs in the outset of my early career. And thankfully now it's a lot more long term, and I don't have like gaps in my work schedule, always busy. But anyone who starts their business knows, like, when you have a gap period, you want to fill in that period with learning how to build skills. So I was learning how to do like the Adobe suite. And then I was like, I'm going to fit in Hunter's Ed. Why not? I should do it. And first initial experience really didn't involve any weapons, but it was going beagling. Here in the mid Atlantic, beagling, hunting with beagles. So you deploy
Mm-hmm.
the beagles to go chase rabbits. And you dress up, kind of fancy sometimes. I just wore camo and boots and whatever. I was comfortable. It was cold. So I was like, I'm not going to sacrifice comfort for
For
looking
style.
for
Yeah.
style. I was like, no, let's keep with convenience. Like, I don't look terrible. I'm not shoddy. I'm warm. I have, high insulate boots, learning the ropes, all that jazz. And so beagling was interesting, just to see the dogs. These were like young, inexperienced beagles run and see the rabbit outsmart them. The rabbit ran by me and my dad. I remember I was like, oh my gosh, these beagles, they're not prepared for the rabbit. So that was a cool like first taste of hunting before I really went into my first trip. The turning point for me, what really solidified my interest in hunting, was when I had my first success. It was my first hunting trip, legit hunting trip ever, and I was successful. Maybe I was just very confident. I was in a good mood. I had practiced like breathing techniques and had done a little bit of clay shooting before. It's the hardest shooting, in my personal opinion. Like, I'm great with long distance shooting, handgun shooting is great, but shooting at projectiles still to
It's
me
difficult.
is challenging because you don't know where it's going to aim, and it's a little more challenging to be able to navigate it. And obviously you want to be mindful of the people around you. Are you, for upland hunting, are you in a group? Are you in kind of like that triangle? And then for duck or waterfowl hunting, like, you have to be very mindful that multiple people in your party are not shooting at the same target. And so for me, it's always kind of a challenge to do that. But I've gotten better, and I plan to get better with more experiences. But I was doing a client project with a service dog provider here in the DC area. And as part of my payment, they were like, we're going to throw in a hunting trip as part of your payment. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Great.
Mm-hmm.
They asked me, it's one of my early video works. And I look back on that video project, I was like, oh, this is actually not too decent. Not too bad, excuse me. It was halfway decent for an amateur just learning how to edit video. And so I look back and I was like, oh, one of my earliest video projects, not too shabby, pretty good, halfway decent. And so my goal was to film people, film the participants, and produce a product for them to use, which they did, and they liked it. And then after I completed it for the first round of hunting, got all the footage I needed, they said to me, okay, it's your turn. With this last group, we're going to pair you with this guide, pair you with these participants. And I was paired with I forget the breed. It looks like a German wide-haired pointer, but it's not. It's the Italian one.
Drathar. Oh no, those are the Germans.
The Griffon, maybe.
Drathar is a. Oh, now I'm gonna.
I forget what it is, but it looks like
yeah.
the wide-haired German pointer, but it's an Italian breed.
Okay.
If for those listening, they're gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, how did she not know what this breed is?"
Yeah,
it's kind of hard, but I know it looks similar to that, but it's maybe a wide-haired Griffon. There we go. Oh my goodness, yeah, wide-haired Griffon.
Oh, the Griffon, yes.
Yeah, which looks like a wide-haired German
short-haired pointer.
Yeah, but yeah, wide-haired Griffon, if I'm getting it correctly. So the dog was phenomenal. It flushed birds, it pointed, it had good intuition, knew the surroundings, and it was a perfect day. It wasn't overtly chilly. It was cold. It was like an early December day, December 2nd, 2017, I remember. And it was great. Like I said, I practiced breathing techniques. I wasn't nervous. I got excited, obviously, over it, but I wanted to make sure I remembered the 3 B's. The technique to kind of like angle your gun. So you look at the bead, you prepare the bullet, and then, or the barrel, and then the bullet, or the shell. But they were like, learn the 3 B's. I forget exactly what they all were. I wrote a blog post about it, but my memory is kind of jogged about it right now as we're speaking. But I remembered like the 3 B's of handling and doing bird shooting. And so people will know this, of course, who've done it far more at length than I have. But I remembered the 3Bs, and then the dog flushed, and then was able to execute a perfect shot, a really good shot, first on a rooster pheasant, and then a chucker, and then 2 quails. So like I said, I memorized the 3Bs, what I was told to memorize, position myself, make sure I angled the bead on the gun, and then make sure the barrel is pointed properly. And so when I did that, I didn't get shaky, on the outset like you would with a big game species. So I was like calm and collected. I was like, whoa, I did this. This is so great. The dog worked really hard. And just to see that connection between the dog and the hunters and the handlers was phenomenal. I don't know. And there's like drips of dew, morning dew, and it was kind of like not foggy, but it was kind of like misty. It was a unique atmosphere. And so for me, I can always point back to my first hunting experience because of the surroundings, watching the dog, my own personal feelings, and then kind of feeling the sense of accomplishment on my very first hunt that I was able to harvest something and not let that go to waste. I paid tribute to the bird. I took a nice picture, holding it. Of course, some people didn't like it. You can't please everyone. And then I had one holding the deceased bird, but like in a respectful manner over it and paying tribute to it. And so for me, it was a really kind of life-changing moment. That was the first time I considered myself a hunter. I became a hunter that day. And when you recognize that, you know that you have a responsibility if you're doing these activities to, again, practice the safety rules, try different styles, be accepting of failure. I've learned with hunting, you have to accept failure. Failure is a natural part of the hunting process. You're going to see animals. You won't be able to take a shot because you don't want to shoot something illegally or that is unethically or unethically. And so it teaches you patience, much like fishing teaches you patience as well, but in a different manner.
Well, that's really cool. I haven't had the opportunity to go upland hunting. I mean, I've been on a dove hunt because dove hunting here is like
upland,
one of the
kind
biggest.
Right?
I don't know if I don't know if it's considered. I don't even know what the definition of upland is.
Upland means not on water, so on land. Yeah.
Okay, so then I guess a dove does.
I believe dove does count as upland. Yeah.
So I don't think we refer to it as upland hunting here. To be quite honest, until I started getting into having more friends in the professional, honestly, or having different organizations we were part of, I didn't know there was a whole different definition for upland hunting. I was just bird hunting for me, duck hunting or dove hunting. And so I've been duck hunting and dove hunting, but I have not been, I guess I should say upland, but I have not been pheasant or quail or chucker or anything like that. It's not as prominent here. There are certain outfitters who have abilities to take you on hunts like that, but usually I have a lot of friends who go up into Kansas and different areas where it's just a little bit more prominent. But that's definitely on my list. And I was going to ask you, it's really interesting when you went into you just realized you're a hunter, right? So for me, growing up with guns and being, hunting snakes and I've always been around guns and killing pigs and things like that were invasive. I never had that moment where I was like, oh, I'm a hunter now. And so it was really interesting to hear you say you were old enough and conscious enough to be like, this is a huge moment for me. I'll never forget this type of thing. So for me, I think it was just fishing for a long time. So I got used to the idea of taking an animal's life and eating it and everything else. But as far as taking my first animal, it definitely it was a dove, but then also my first large animal was a black buck.
Wow.
And that for me was probably my moment. And that was in my 20s too. But I just think it's so cool to hear you I'm a hunter. That's super neat.
And it comes with responsibilities. I think that's what people forget when they're criticizing hunters, that they think that we're doing this on a whim for bloodlust and we just want to kill things. Most of the time, I tell people I love admiring the animals I want to target. I love admiring the animals and wildlife that come to my backyard, even blue jays, cardinals, owls. I have bald eagles and ospreys that fly over my house all the time. I always hear them kind of chirping and screeching from the distance. They have nests right near the high school near my house. And so I get excited to see that. And I've had foxes, red foxes. I've had woodchucks. I've had so many different kinds of animals. Deer, of course, as well. I haven't seen coyotes, but we have coyotes here. And we just have a plethora of animals. And we have black bears, obviously, in Virginia, but many of them have started to come closer to Washington, D.C. We had some in downtown Washington, kind of on the outskirts of the city center. And then we've had some in Arlington, Virginia, which is kind of the next community to mine, the next city to me. That's pretty close. to hear of these young black bears, male black bears that are adolescents that have left the den, want to kind of make their own home. And so we have such a diverse amount of wildlife, like even just to admire it, like that's largely what you're doing as a hunter because you're being taught to respect the wildlife. You're only taking enough to cull or to fulfill
Mm-hmm.
your tag, and you're leaving it to just regenerate and make sure that you're not taking more than your lot. Because if you engaged in market hunting or you hunted everything out of oblivion to oblivion rather, we won't have these resources for the future. That's why the conservation model was developed in the early 20th century. That's why we have Pittman Robertson, Dingell Johnson Amendment acts for both hunting and fishing respectively, because people were overfishing, people were overhunting, and they saw a
Mm-hmm.
decimation of wildlife and what it does to the landscape and to the economy too when you get rid of all these wildlife as well. So people realize these are knuckleheaded things to do. We need to improve ourselves. We need wildlife management agencies. We need public-private partnerships. We need companies to step up and say that we're going to be responsible and encourage
Mm-hmm.
our citizens to be responsible. And I would say this model is largely working today. We could talk more about efforts to modernize, or not modernize, but rather to reimagine that, which is problematic. I actually sat in on a webinar recently about that, and it was really fascinating that more people are starting to speak about this kind of threat to the conservation model we all know and are familiar with, that has really defined and catalyzed in this country and inspired those abroad to even look to the United States and say, we need to replicate this here.
And that's what I've heard, is that I've heard so many podcasts and different interviews where people are like, you just cannot argue with the fact that the conservation model we have it works, and it is,
Absolutely.
elite when it comes to, even the rest of the world. Can you speak a little bit about, because I know that you have kind of dove a little segue into the politics side of things. You and I were talking about a couple different bills on the horizon, or different things that are on the horizon that you could see maybe affecting not just, obviously Texas, but the U.S. in general. So if you want to share, is there anything that you're thinking about being like, we need to be aware of that? And then we can kind of dive into,
Yes.
what the general public can do to help and make sure that we're protecting, and that, the lawmakers are aware of what we want and what we need for the wildlife.
I'll discuss a few topics and I'll do my best to condense and summarize them to the best of my ability so your listeners can understand it. I would say more immediately to Texas, you guys have that mountain lion group that Cable Smith has often talked about.
Yes.
And so that's definitely something to be aware of. And that kind of branches off from a greater movement by preservationist environmentalists who masquerade as conservationists, say they are conservationists, but they're coming in and saying that conservation needs to be defined and modeled after animal rights. That is not conservationist, that is preservationist. And that is very problematic because these folks, unfortunately, do not engage in good faith debates. They don't recognize the benefits of hunting. They're wholly opposed to it. They're even opposed to hunting and even crabbing. That is how bizarre sometimes these people are. The mountain lion crowd in Texas may not have all of those animal right platitudes, but they do take tenets of that. Kind of big picture relating to state agencies more immediately to what could happen to Texas, going off of this mountain lion group. There are efforts to reimagine wildlife agencies. You may not feel this impact right now, but you are seeing this in states like California, Washington State, largely states that are unfriendly to the firearms community and hunting activities. You'll see this often deep in New England, deep in the Northeast, and a little bit in the Pacific Northwest, California, and in states like New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado even. You are seeing efforts to remake wildlife agencies away from a true conservationist bent, recognizing the contributions of hunters and anglers, to this animal rights iteration. And so the only way I could see Texas, unfortunately, being compromised in this way is if this mountain lion group, or groups like one that is called Wildlife for All. This is a group your listeners should be aware of. I'm happy to send literature on them, but they have said and claimed that conservation stakeholder relations are not democratic. But what they're proposing is not democratic. It is obfuscating stakeholder input. It is removing people from discussion, removing hunters and anglers. So what they're proposing essentially is anti-democratic, all the while they are projecting their kind of intention and their agenda onto people who are already making the conservation kind of input process democratic, hearing everyone, debating and deliberating what is good, and obviously making sure that final decisions reflect the North American model of wildlife conservation. So they are claiming the current model is outdated. it's anti-scientific, it is anti-democratic. And when I see what they're proposing, like I said, it's not democratic, it's not encompassing of all stakeholders. They want to, again, move it to this preservationist animal rights model, which would upend the successes we've had. And they want to do kind of like a rewilding of public lands, and they want to do a rewilding of nature, meaning no hunting, no public lands access, even for recreational purposes, which I can segue into the kind of a policy to be worried about as a sportsman. So they kind of have this no touch, let's rewild everything. But if there's no management, given what we have today, humans are important on the landscape, much like wildlife is. If there's no human input, positive human input to at least sustainably manage wildlife, it's going to create not only human animal conflicts, but animal conflicts upon animals, bear upon bear, deer upon deer, like predator versus prey, like a lot of conflicts that are unnecessary and that don't do any service to nature nor to people. And so one rule kind of federally to watch, this is a rule from like the Department of Interior, which is an agency. So there's rulemaking which Texans could feel the effect of unless a lawsuit stopped this. So there is a Bureau of Land Management rule kind of going off of this preservationist model. They are claiming that this rule is going to put conservation uses on equal footing with grazing, ranching, hunting, fishing, etc. And it derives from a law called the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, which has been in place since 1979. This rule, having read through it myself, already recognizes conservation as a use. It's just not enforced. And by ignoring that and proposing kind of preservationist alternatives, again, with this no touch, let's rewild everything, let's make it so we can have groups bid on leases, on conservation leases. And this includes conservation leases for non-uses. And like I said, when you have this attitude that is very anti-human, it is very anti-wildlife management and very anti-wildlife conservation. What this proposal to create a conservation lease would do would create an unfair advantage to anti-hunting groups, very preservationist environmental groups, which they're one and the same essentially.
Right.
And because they have outsized influence, a lot of money, millions, billions of dollars from donors, special interests, what have you, and they're very powerful and they're very well organized, they could say that we are going to bid on these conservation leases to create non-uses. So nobody can access this land. Like I said, when there's no access here, it's very bad. And treating human input as a negative thing is a very archaic, outdated thought process. We don't need to think like that, because we can be positive factors on the landscape. We can bolster the environment. Kind of this anti-human, conservation attitude is very outdated, and that's what's made modern day environmentalism very repellent and very off-putting to a lot of people. But when you talk about conservation, you get people to sign on to, yes, I want to be an environmental steward. Yes, I want to protect wildlife. I want to make sure it's properly managed, what have you. And so this BLM rule does affect sportsmen and women, because if, let's say you want to, it's public land falls on private land, and let's say this conservation lease is enacted, and it's off limits to no uses, even recreational uses. What if those land managers say you're trespassing? Right. Even though there have been established right-of-ways and permissions that have been longstanding through the Bureau of Land Management. So I worry it creates conflicts there. And I'm opposed to the multiple use mandate being essentially perverted. I hate to use that term, and it's very charged, but perverted and changed radically from what it's intended to be. Because the Bureau of Land Management is not supposed to be the National Park Service. It's supposed to allow for hunting and fishing as well as commercial activities like energy development, grazing, ranching, etc. We already have an agency that is preservationist. They have a place in management. We need some preservation, of course. I'm not wholly opposed to it. But making this agency a continuation of National Park Service would be totally counterintuitive and really hurt public lands access. And the people who are pushing these conservation leases, they're like, oh yeah, we're pro-public lands, we're pro-public access. No, they're not. Because when you create these non-uses, you have a lot of downstream effects that could ultimately hurt, like I said, already embedded agreements between private landowners and hunters, anglers, outfitters, etc. We don't want to give an outsized advantage to people who would lock up lands. A lot of people complain about privatization of public lands, which I'm opposed to. I'm a free market person, but in this respect, it doesn't mean I'm not for the markets. But I think public lands have a special exception. We already have a lot of private land. I'm concerned about, foreign countries coming in and gobbling private land as well. That's a separate issue from our discussion today. But I'm worried that the people who claim that privatization efforts will threaten public lands, they're turning a blind eye to this attempt to privatize public lands by creating
Uh-huh.
non-uses. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what it essentially is doing. You can't say you're opposed to privatization, then welcome anti-hunting groups bidding on these lands, securing
Yep.
these leases, and then creating non-uses, and then shutting people off. A perfect example to tie where a parallel of this is already happening. I've heard this is already occurring in places like Canada, in the British Columbia, where these animal rights groups have bid on leases and created non-uses closed off to bear hunting. This is already happening to our neighbors in the north. Your listeners can Google. I'm not making this up out of thin air. Like, this is already happening and being tested in other countries, our neighbors to the north especially. And so that's what I'm worried about, this model, our model being upended, especially if you support public land hunting and access and multiple uses. That model needs to continue because we need lots of stakeholders. We have people in energy development and in grazing and farming and these so-called extractive industries. They also go fishing and hunting too. Why would they want to ruin their environment and their surroundings as well? So I welcome all stakeholder input. I want that stakeholder relationship to continue. And that's why I've been very outspoken opposed to this BLM rule. Diving into fishing more so and boating, so far, this rule, what I'm speaking to, is called the vessel strike rule. This is a Department of Commerce rule, separate from Department of Interior, Forest Service, USDA. But they also have governance over fishing and boating at the federal level in this capacity, much like the Fish and Wildlife Service does. But this decision that they have, or soon to be, I guess, finalized decision, there's back and forth over this, but a rule was, I believe, finalized earlier this year, and the final decision should come out in the coming months, except if there is a legal challenge and that stops it from going into implementation. But the Commerce Department is proposing a vessel strike rule or a vessel speed rule, which would make it so that boats between 35 to 65 feet in length cannot travel more than 11.5 miles per hour offshore for upwards of 6 months of the year, because they say it's a measure to protect endangered whales like the North Atlantic right whale. We've heard a lot about this endangered whale. It is in a very dire position. It's in dire straits. There are only about 350 individual whales left. And I've reported on it. If people want to know about my research into whales and different activities that are impacting it, they can talk to me offline. I'd be happy to share more. But they're scapegoating this whale, which has other threats to it, which are pretty easy to deduce and surmise from where I'm going with this. But I won't go into it so much here. There's a lot of threats to whales with offshore wind development potentially, but that's what I'll largely talk about. So people have other concerns about threats to whales through activities like offshore wind and others, which are pretty invasive offshore. It requires a lot of drilling and sonar activity and interfering with the ocean floor, what have you. And so I'm of the mind that these activities could potentially be harming the whale more. I've seen letters from the NOAA Fisheries, which is a subsidiary of the Commerce Department. One NOAA Fisheries scientist said offshore wind is actually having an effect on whales. And we haven't seen that letter really put out there that much because people don't want that to interfere with offshore wind development. It's a very big priority of some environmentalists and even some conservationists. And so they're saying that the whale is being threatened by boaters and recreational anglers for the most part. And so boaters and anglers in the sport fishing industry and the recreational boating industry have said, excuse me, we haven't been consulted on this, and we want to make sure the whale doesn't get harmed further as well. What I have seen from and spoken to, or what I've heard from rather, and seen from the industry and representatives that I've spoken to offline, privately, in person, what have you, I'm always in constant communication with these folks too. They've told me we were never consulted. They have said in public quotes, in articles and press releases, we were sidelined by the Biden administration, the Commerce Department, in not being consulted. We would have had other suggestions that don't close off access. So you're lowering the vessel speed for offshore activities for boats between 35 to 65 feet in length. That's a lot of boats. It's on the Atlantic side, it's like 60,000, close to 70,000 charters, boats, watercraft, all of that for commercial, recreational purposes, what have you. And so if those 60 some odd thousand boats cannot go offshore because the whale is migrating or there may be potential conflicts with the whale, if you go offshore, that would present problems with displacement from water activities, from boating, from fishing, from commuting by boat. It would impact the industries economically. It would be 400,000 people potentially displaced from their jobs. It would essentially create no-go zones because if the whale is migrating through these offshore regions, they're going to probably put some marine protection areas and other barriers to say it's a very sensitive area. We can't have any boats and anglers go through here, so we have to block it off to make sure that these whales can safely navigate and migrate. And then you also have, like I said, the access issue. We have seen some challenges, like I said before, with public lands access for hunting. We're now seeing it with public water access. People think, there's nothing to public water access. There's also the red snapper issue, affects the Gulf Coast as well. And then not only are they wanting to do this in the Atlantic Ocean, they have a desire to do this in the Gulf of Mexico too. This was just put on my radar. The comment period is still open until like early July. I will send it to you, Megan, so you can share it with your listeners. In the Gulf Coast, they found another endangered whale and have said we need to put and impose a similar vessel speed rule to prevent whale boat strikes in the Gulf of Mexico. I haven't seen the economic impacts, how many boats would have to be kind of clamped down and kept in the marina, like how many would be stalled from operating. But I can imagine it's very similar to the toll that we would see. And multiple billions of dollars would be lost because these people can't go offshore. They can't do charters. They can't commute. They can't, do joyrides and go offshore, what have you. And so it'll have huge deleterious consequences economically. It'll also affect your access to public waters, which you should have full access to because, again, much like hunting with Pittman Robertson, Dingell-Johnson, which is kind of the law that governs how monies from fishing and boating activities go to conservation to conserve fisheries, habitats that fish and other related components and fish and aquatic life rather rely on. And so we have these monies that are generated because of people buying boats, buying fishing licenses, tackle, other equipment. So that model will be disrupted if people will be barred from accessing offshore opportunities for up to 6 months of the year, especially on the Atlantic side. Like, what is that going to have an effect on in terms of jobs, economic security? People can't afford to not work 6 months. And these are like the high time, like the most traffic time, like people go offshore, I think around the summer months. And so when there's a lot of boat traffic and there's a lot of activity from going offshore. So during the high season, people would have to stop, stall their boats, stay camped back in the marina and not work. So it has so many different implications here. And then, like I said, there's even a similar rule being proposed for the Gulf of Mexico. And then you've heard Cable and others like myself have talked about the lead bans, lead phase outs. Lead phase outs will affect Texans if it's, let's say, a wildlife refuge in National Wildlife Service lands in Texas. I forget if you guys are primarily private. I know that for sure, but don't you have some wildlife refuges under Fish and Wildlife in Texas?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. You do have some. Okay, good. So let's say they decide to open more national wildlife refuges. Let's say they decide to do it in Texas. A private landowner, a part of the 90 some odd percent that is already privately held. Let's say a landowner decides, I want there to be more public land for Texans. So I want my stake of land, my 20,000 acres, what have you, to be converted to a national wildlife refuge. Great. So what is being conditioned now for any future new opening to fishing or hunting activities on National Wildlife Service lands, which are under Fish and Wildlife Service, under Department of Interior, openings are conditioned on lead prohibitions for ammunition and tackle. And that may not seem like a major impactful decision. Lead tackle and bullets, well, lead tackle especially is not that expensive. Lead bullets are another story because of inflation and supply chain issues. But people they're like, shifting to lead alternatives, it's not that much more expensive, a couple dollars. But a couple dollars adds a lot, and especially for new people who are just discovering fishing and they're comfortable using lead tackle and they know how to properly dispose of lead tackle and lead bullets, and they're conscious and they don't want to leave a trace. They want to leave their surroundings better than they found it. When someone hears like, I won't be able to use these components while hunting and fishing, how much more is that going to add up? Like for these activities, like how much more of my product or my tools and my accessories and my gear and my guns, like how much of that is a lead component, And so even though it's not a significant price, those additions and those cost barriers and the increase in expenditures is going to add up gradually to people. And then it's going to have downstream effects to those in the lead tackle and lead ammunition industries. If
Mm-hmm.
you ban it slowly there, what's to stop them from going retroactively and banning lead usage on already opened public lands under federal lands management to using lead, to using lead. So I worry that this opens the door not only to future openings being vulnerable to lead phase outs. What is to stop them from saying, okay, let's retroactively apply this to all public lands? You
And
give
that's
them a
the
little
best. I
bit.
mean, that's the way you have to look at it, though. It's
Yes.
like, okay, well, if it's this and we're accepting this and, we're releasing or
Conceding
letting
here.
go of something, what's next? Like, it doesn't stop there. And that's with so many different policies. Like, you really have to be aware, and we can dive into this just a little bit of what your opinion is on where we can serve the
Yes.
best, right?
Yes.
I mean, you need to be at least aware, not just of what affects your own state, but the entire nation. Because
Absolutely.
for me personally, I didn't hunt outside of Texas or fish outside of Texas for years, but now I want to, and I want to make sure that I'm aware of what's happening in Idaho and what's happening in Washington and other states and things like that. I mean, just to know it may be gone tomorrow and I could have done something about it, right?
Right. We all have to work together. I hate to use the term collective effort, or we have to work as a collective, but we all have to work together, regardless of our geography, regardless of what type of hunting or fishing style we do, come together, whether it is engaging in a media campaign, doing something as simple as writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor talking about how hunting and fishing serve an important role in the landscape of environmental stewardship. Even doing something as simple as that can go a long way, inspire action elsewhere. So maybe that's the first step for people to do, to take proactive action. Write about it, make your voice heard that way. You can also opine on your concerns with the attacks on true conservation on social media. Make videos, reels, perhaps do a long form type of thing, like a mini documentary about what is at stake, what could be lost if this type of hunting or if this type of tool or this type of accessory is lost. Make it kind of a big picture thing. And then legislatively, how do you get involved? You have to look to groups that are already working for our interests. And we have phenomenal groups out there. I will point to 3 that come to mind directly to me. Safari Club International does a great job, not only abroad, but here in the United States as well. They have action forms that you can fill out. They generate a response and kind of a whole treatise about general statements that you can send to your members of Congress, senators, and House members. There's also Sportsmen's Alliance, which similarly does that as well. And then there's a new group on the landscape called Howl for Wildlife, does similar kind of to this, but they will take state issues more aggressively sometimes, or issues that may be kind of slipping under the radar. But all of these groups are fully aware of what is happening in the states, what's happening federally. And Howl for Wildlife, for instance, is very interesting in terms of direct action. Again, it personalizes like a form that you could just put your name.
Yeah, Brandon gets their emails.
Yes.
And basically what they do is they provide, okay, here's the name of the person you need to email. Here's their email. Here's their mailing address if you want to send them a letter. Here's a template you can copy and paste.
Yeah,
right?
It's right there for you. You just got to click send.
Yep.
And so I think, so you putting your personal spin to something, you can make an impact. And cumulatively, with what like Howl for Wildlife does with all the inputs, I think for spring bear hunting or something recently, they had 50,000 submissions.
So many.
And that propelled the lawmaker to reconsider. I don't know exactly what the bill was. I think it was bear hunts or something in Colorado. I forget which topic it was recently, but it was something current relating to a large carnivore species. I think it was probably black bear, something like that. But they've had action oriented stuff. I think where 50,000 people submitted comments, and it got the bill to be removed and withdrawn. And so stuff like that can carry a long way, even in very hostile states to hunting. And maybe in Oregon too. I know they just had a victory recently with how, I think something relating to management, how management is governed. Even in Oregon, a place as hostile to hunting now as Oregon, which it used to not be the case, which is so sad. It's like an indictment of like, where have some of these states that have historically been friendly to hunting have fallen? And writing a letter to the editor or an op-ed, I'm a great resource if you need help. Any of your listeners, you, Megan, Brandon, anyone in Poma, I've offered the services to Bethany, one of our new members from Oklahoma. I can be a resource. I've done a lot of op-eds, hundreds of op-eds. So I'm more than happy to teach people as a Poma board member, pay it forward, teach you all how to do it, create templates, give you the resources to do that, teach you there. And then you have these forms. And then a third thing I want to mention going off of, writing correspondences, submitting these letters, even if they're generated, going to your state legislature whether it's a lobby day or a day where a bill is being heard. Maybe you're invited to speak, or maybe you petition to have yourself as a witness to speak in your state legislature. And even in the federal government's a little harder, and I can help people. I know how you can potentially become a witness federally, but it's a little easier to become a witness in your state legislature. Whether it's your wildlife agency is having a commission meeting, or a committee within a chamber, the House or the Senate is hearing a bill. They don't really have a lot of foot traffic. They're not televised on TV as much. So that's a great opportunity for you to go there and engage in citizen lawmaking, talking to people, meeting your lawmakers, making yourself known. So you could be active in those 3 steps, directly, indirectly, doing that. But those few measures, and I think that was a 4th thing that I talked about. So writing, traditionally posting about it on social media for greater awareness, filling out these forms, using resources from Safari Club, Howl for Wildlife, Sportsmen's Alliance. And then after you've become animated and initiated that way, the 4th step would be actually going in person to meet with your lawmakers, and or volunteering yourself to submit comments. You can submit comments like you do with bills, but even for like a rule that's going into effect as well in your state agency. But then also sitting in, meeting lawmakers, and then potentially putting yourself out there as a potential witness. There's often calls, open calls for witnesses to speak and say their kind of piece and their perspective for different things that are being deliberated, bills or initiatives or a measure, what have you. And so many opportunities there. I'm probably just scratching the surface in terms of involvement, but those are kind of 4 things that I would recommend going off of there. Podcasting about it. Like I said, there's a way to broadcast it directly, you as an individual, or working with groups to collectively put out something in opposition or in support of something. There are ways that we can engage and win on the battle of ideas. And I'm optimistic, even though we are up against a lot of very well-funded sources. They have a lot of sympathy in media, but I think hunters and anglers and true conservationists are starting to be at their level. We are competing with them. We're crafting narratives that are more sympathetic. We're showing multiple dimensions of hunting and fishing, not just the catch or the grip and grin. We're showing all the facets of it. So people are intrigued. People are also really concerned, where's their food coming from? So I think there's a huge opportunity. What do you have? It's like 5% of people in the United States are anti-hunting, and then 5% are very pro-hunting. And then you have like the 90%, 85, 90% who are kind of ambivalent, but are persuadable. And so, like I said, even though there are negative forces at work, and we do have some obstacles in terms of media and who's controlling the messaging and how that message is being received, we have opportunities, like I said, to engage, even though there are some obstacles in front of us. And so I tell people not to lose hope. You can be engaged, find your niche. You can repeat what I am saying in your own fashion. Like, I don't want to be the only person from DC area or in politics or in conservation policy to be saying this. I want others to also be echoing what I say. Find stories that have not been covered by me or others out there who are newsmakers. Find your own niche and find your own story and tell it, because there's so much slipping under the radar in the conservation space. Like, what is at stake, with certain things here. So anyone can have their input. Anyone can be a stakeholder. Anyone can be a newsmaker. And you don't have to just be someone like me who's interfacing, putting things out there on social media, doing TV. Like, you can have an impact even behind the screen.
Right. And that segues nicely into what POMA is, the Professional Outdoor Media Association, and kind of where Brandon and we've found a lot of value when it comes to, meeting with other storytellers who are passionate about either, advocating for conservation or just advocating for firearms education, or, I think that was the core of POMA when it started, was mainly in the firearms industry.
Yes.
And so can you speak a little bit about just the mission of POMA and kind of how that ties into everything that you do in your freelance work? And then also, how, you guys are wanting to grow as like, we're videographers and photographers.
We need video.
Whereas you have a lot of writers, and we're trying to get more into writing, but then it's just kind of one of those organizations where we feel there's so much support for a niche, like you said, find your niche. I meet people that are, specifically fishing offshore. There's people that are specifically, with the NSSF that are working with them as far as National Shooting Sports Foundation. Yes. So just kind of a little bit of general, to wrap it up, just talk about POMA just a little bit, and, what your goals are coming up and kind of where shift you're seeing.
I was looking for a way to get involved in journalism in the outdoors, because I was already doing a lot of like political writing, political commentary, and I felt like I was missing something while I was starting to write these issues early in my freelance journalism career. I was feeling like I had a deficit. Like there was no group or all the professional journalism societies that were environmental or so-called conservationists were very opposed to hunting and
Yeah.
fishing as a way of life. And
Mhm.
so when I heard about POMA, I believe it was 2016, from our just past president, Michelle Sherman, I had interacted with her, met her, and she was the one who really got me interested in POMA in 2016. Then I waited till 2018 to apply. I dragged my feet a little bit in applying. But when I learned about it, I got involved even as an associate member firsthand. And then I had a lot of writing under my belt to graduate to voting media. And I think we may change our criteria coming up to make it a little easier for prospective members to apply and get accepted in the voting media category. And so for me, I felt like POMA has been able to personally help me hone my writing ability, give me opportunities. I've been able to, through POMA membership, with someone who used to serve on the board with me, who was also a member. I think he's still a member, but he kind of reneged on his board duties a few years ago. But he mentored me in POMA when I joined and said, Gabriella, you should read this magazine writing book. It's like, I forget who it's by, but Zach Vukurovich asked me for the title recently and I gave it to him. But it's like the writer's handbook to magazine writing, the guidebook to magazine writing. I forget who the publisher was, but it's a well-known publisher. So I read that book because I've understood how to do journalism writing. I could do AP style, but I was like, I need to learn how to do magazine writing that these outdoor endemic publications are looking for. So I did. I started to do a lot of writing. I wrote for about a year with Sporting Classics daily and one or two times in the print edition. So I had those pieces that I was able to pick from. I submitted a few to POMA for the Pinnacle Awards my first year. Didn't think associate members would also be able to potentially win. And I chose a piece on, I submitted a couple, but my piece on grizzly bear conservation stemming from a federal court decision that blocked a grizzly bear hunt from going into effect after it got the proper delisting. And I spoke to stakeholders who would be affected by this. And so the judges in that year thought it was prescient and important and pertinent. And so they felt like I was deserving of getting the Pinnacle Award for conservation. So it's a very high honor that I got that. And I, 4 years later, now look back on that memory again, kind of that life-changing moment I had when I learned how to shoot guns and go hunting. It solidified me as a legitimate, outdoor writer, like getting this, like it's something to show for it and not to be ashamed about. And so POMA, I think for a lot of people who hunt and fish and work in journalism, whether you're a beat writer or a multimedia specialist or a podcaster or videographer like you and Brandon are into visual kind of media, POMA is a place for anyone. Like for me, I first started off with writing. Now I do multimedia because I like to be versatile. I've learned how to do different skills, podcasting, video, speaking, what have you. And we don't want to isolate anyone who has an interest in telling an outdoor story from an organization. And an unfortunate thing with outdoor media, because, time passes on, we do have problems with recruitment and retaining, especially hunters. Fishing hasn't experienced kind of a drop off yet, but even in the outdoor media space, the seasoned journalists are kind of aging out and it's hard to replace them or find enough replacements for them. And so a lot of very prominent longstanding groups have went under. They've closed down. Siopa was one group that recently shuttered its operations, and a few others. There's a Florida Outdoor Writers Association that closed down too. So all these groups that were there for a lot of outdoor writers that are established today are not going to be available for up and comers in the present. And so with recognizing that, POMA wants to be a vehicle, and there are several other groups. There's Aglow is also a great thing. I don't see them having any issues sustaining members or continuing on. But some regional groups will still continue to exist. We have another group out there. It's called the Outdoor Writers of America, Outdoor Writers Association of America. That's the group we branched off of. There was some bad blood. I don't know too much into it and read too much into it, but they're more for preservationists. Some hunters and anglers still write with them. By all means, be a member with what group works best for you. But they still exist too. They kind of cater to kind of the naturalists and the preservationists a bit more, but some in hunting, and NSSF has gone to speak there as well. But for those who feel more comfortable in a place where you can support the Second Amendment, you can fish different styles, you can fly, or you could do bait or spin cast. You're not going to feel judged about not doing fly fishing, but I do all styles myself. Doesn't matter what style you do, but if you support all type of styles of fishing, all types of hunting, POMA is a place for you, especially if you want to flex your kind of creative muscles and really grow as a professional. And I think we've had some growing pains recently as an organization. We are moving in, I would say, very positive directions. We are trying to make our benefits to our members more known. We want to highlight more conferences and activities for our membership. We are going to have a new executive director at some point of the year. We have a new president, Jen Ripple, who's phenomenal. And she wants to bring in the fishing contingent more because we have really neglected to bring in fishers and anglers. And so we want to have that balance, like you said, with having visual media people, traditional media people, podcasters, influencers, everyone, the whole gamut, run the gamut of content creators, regardless of how old they are. But we really need to reach the generation after you and me. We're millennials. Yeah. We need to reach Generation Z, and there is a potential to reach them. They're very savvy with social media. So I think
and they care so much.
They do.
They really do. They're part of that group, and millennials as well, but they are definitely caring exactly where does the food come from? What's in it? And coming from an agricultural background, I can resonate with that. And I love that so much because they just care so much. And that's the thing. Right. It's like, they're not just turning the other way to ignore issues. Like they're much more willing to speak up for what they care about.
Right. And there is a problem though with reaching them sometimes. And even on their side, the millennials think, let's say they've achieved some modicum of success. Like they have some brand partnerships, they have hundreds of thousands of followers. And these young people don't think they need mentorship, but that's a kind of wrong-headed thing. And, not everyone is going to join. That's obviously a given. It's not for everyone. It's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people maybe don't need an outlet like POMA, but for young people who want to learn the industry, because there is a lot of gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is somewhat healthy to some extent. You have to test yourself. You have to prove yourself. That's where gatekeeping, I think, works. But there's a problem with gatekeeping because you have people who are in their islands and they don't want new people to come. This is not POMA, but I'm saying in general, from what I've experienced outside of POMA, sometimes like in politics, it's very hard to break into something unless you have an in. And so POMA can be that third party entity that helps you break through gatekeeping, helps you navigate the industry, pairs you with the mentor, gives you opportunities to be printed in potentially very prominent publications. So with POMA, I didn't finish my thought, but the gentleman who was serving on the board with me, but who was one of my early mentors in POMA, he said, why don't you, since you're very motivated and you're a good writer, why don't I connect you to Field and Stream and Outdoor Life? So I got to write a few pieces for them, get printed, get a nice paycheck through writing pieces with them, like 4 pieces, and have my byline in those 2 very established, esteemed outdoor publications of record. Like to be printed in that is a very big deal. And I don't take that lightly. And even though it was a short-term, experience, like I can say now I've been in Field and Stream and Outdoor Life. And so that was a POMA connection. I would never have made that connection and had that opportunity had I not been in POMA. And so we are a vehicle that can match media writers and visual people, again, traditional, non-traditional participants to who they want to connect with. You want to connect to a brand. We most likely have a connection in the corporate space. You want to connect to a publication. We will likely know one of the editors. You want to go on a podcast. You want to do this. You want to do that. We will know someone who at least knows someone, even if it's not directly. And all of us are pretty well connected. Us board members have a lot of connections, even outside of POMA board of directors and the organization. We have our own outdoor contacts, and we're more than happy to be a resource, but we have very exciting things ahead. We want to make it so the group is more accessible. We want to have a lot more young people because we can't continue as an organization if we taper off and our membership dies out. And so our leadership recognizes that. This has been a long-standing conversation, but we perhaps didn't have the proper tools and strategies in place to fully realize that. So we are a lot more activated to do that going forward, of course. And so I'm positive for outdoor media, and I think there are opportunities to get our folks not only in endemic media, but like I said, I want to be a resource. You want to get into let's say your local newspaper, you want to write an op-ed about something going on or how you'll be affected positively or negatively by a policy. I would love to be a resource. I've offered to members, like, I'll teach you guys. Maybe I could do like a webinar on how to do op-ed pitching and writing. Maybe I'll propose that as a POMA insight session going forward. Maybe I'll try to do that. But I also am a part of, I also volunteer myself to do a lot of POMA Insight sessions. So members listening or future or would-be members, you can take advantage of fun resources like that. Like we do webinars, seminars, and like I said, in between every conference, conferences are held annually. We have a conference slated for next May 2023 in South Carolina. It's a very outdoorsy setting, which I'm very excited about. Everyone's very excited about us going to Pine Woods, South Carolina, working with the South Carolina Waterfowl Association. We'll be having fishing and hunting and shooting sports right at our fingertips. We have a lot of great stuff planned for that. And I think our organizing is going to be, we don't have to worry so much about it because we've had a lot of things offered to us and helped so far. So it's going to be a lot easier to organize with that. But we have great locations planned for the future. I'll wait to confirm what those are. We talked about at the meeting, but I don't want to share any, information because like, what if we decide to change the locations, for 25 and 26, but we have an idea of where future conferences will be, but we want POMA to be a resource. We want POMA to help you break through gatekeeping. We want to connect you to your next opportunity. Maybe freelance writing is what you want to do, freelance video work, or you want to work for a major company like, I can't think of it, maybe Sitka or Pure Fishing or something like that. Like I said, we can be an incubator and a facilitator of your next career move and help you network and be prepared to write about these issues even outside of the outdoor industry as well. So I think that's POMA in a nutshell. And we welcome everyone new to come. Like I said, you could start basically off of an associate membership. Very easy.
That's what we are.
Yeah. It's very easy to start with and graduate to. We will be having some fee reductions, I believe, by the end of the year, early next year. So it'll be a little more affordable. I know the price tag can be a little steep, but like I said, a lot of positive changes coming in POMA, and we recognize that we have to be more active. And so that is our goal.
Yeah. Y'all spoke a lot to that at the conference this year. And just so y'all know, like all of our summer vacations are around this conference. We went to Franklin, Tennessee, like I said, the first year. Last year, we drove from College Station all the way up to Kalispell, Montana. That was an amazing trip. And Brandon obviously proposed on the way up to that. So that was really exciting. That was really exciting trip for us. And then this last one was in Oklahoma. And like she mentioned, we're making a trip to South Carolina. So it's just nice to have like during our off season. I mean, we fish during the summer, but as far as creating content around hunting, unless we're on an axis hunt or something like that, we have a lot more time to focus on our rodeo side. And then also the POMA conference is something we look forward to every year. And yes, to answer your question, Gabby, earlier you asked about if it's been beneficial. I mean, obviously the relationship we have with you has been super beneficial and very, energizing. And it's been great to see and follow what you are working on. And
we got to help each other.
Yeah, exactly. But then even just we've gotten gigs from this. I mean, we've worked with the NSSF. I'm now working with the Women's Outdoor Media Association on a couple projects. I mean, and that all comes in the last 3 years. The first year we literally were just kind of like sitting there trying to make friends, and the last 2 years we've really made some meaningful connections. And we've worked with Pulsar, Sightmark, and things like that here in Texas because they're a Texas brand.
Yes.
But I mean, it's just been all around a very valuable experience for us. And I'm super happy to hear that, especially from my perspective with videography and a little bit more of the visual side of things, that you are aware that like there's a place for us in POMA. There's, we're going to have some more sessions around that kind of thing. I know we had the photography one this time. But I mean, my favorite session this year by far was the Medic Up.
Yes, I still have to write about it. I'm still I promised them a write up on my Substack, which has like 400 people, but like it's a highly engaged reading populace. I get like 40% opens, so people will read it.
Wow.
And really, like Substack. Also, maybe I should do I need to write this down after the fact. I need to write like seminars and insight sessions about like Substack and op-ed. So this is getting me to write. I'm going to write Substack.
Yeah, go ahead, take a note.
Op-eds for insight sessions for POMA. So see, you could, if you get a membership, you can help. You can take advantage of it, of course.
Absolutely.
And so, as you were saying, Megan, it's been helpful in terms of resources, and that's what it has to be, because you're paying into something. You have to get something out of a membership. Mm-hmm. I've always been a believer of that. Like, I will pay the yearly membership due for POMA because I know it'll produce stuff. And like I said, we're going to start to do. We're going to send more dispatches about events that you can apply your POMA membership to waive your fee for a conference. So people will see the benefits of their membership more when we're going to present them more opportunities, reminders, opportunities, partnerships, things of that sort. That's what an organization should be doing. And I think I'm going to be tackling that project or helping to lead it as the
Okay.
board member with that. So like I said, we're going to have members seeing more opportunities, more things to be on their radar. So you don't say like, whoa, I missed ICAST or I missed SHOT Show. Like, how did I miss this opportunity? How did I miss the deadline? So we're going to make everyone aware of conferences more because these are annual events. There's no drastic changes and they're all pretty easy to get to. And I think we have to like tout. When I first joined POMA, our membership used to apply to like discounts for travel. And we have not talked about that in recent years. So we need to re-up that again and make sure that those perks are still available.
And not to mention the money line listings too.
Yeah, we're keeping those. Those are not going anywhere. Don't worry.
Yeah. So if you guys, I mean, and that's something
changing.
we're always looking at to see there's freelance work that's listed and money, just to give a background. So money, those are basically emails that we get as members that have a list of anything that's related to the outdoor industry at all. And even some that are on the edges, right? Where you have to log into your account to get access to this. This is something that's exclusive for members. And it's basically a connection between corporations and corporate partners. And sometimes they're exclusively listed, right? Like some of the corporate partners that we have, right? We'll see about it first on POMA. Job listings for full-time, part-time, contract, freelance, all of even if it's a temporary position, like remote or in the office, there's all kinds of opportunities that we are constantly aware of. Y'all have done a very good job of doing that. That's something that has never wavered since we've started.
Yes. And I think that will grow even more than what it is. But I think we have to just put the resources out there for members. And even generally speaking, if you're not in POMA, I think, like I said, we just need to make outdoor journalism savvy again and there, because with certain, kind of with the decline of newspapers, you do see a decline of beats and columns. There used to be, every major newspaper used to have an outdoor journalist or outdoor columnist. You're starting to see less of that now. And so there's a vacancy that needs to be filled and a void that has to be replenished through outdoor writing, through freelancers, through people who work, through corporations, what have you. And so, like I said, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm aware of the challenges, and I think POMA is too. So to me, it's exciting. And like you were talking about with crossover, we could talk about this too, because you and Brandon have been trying to wrangle me to go to rodeo, the Houston rodeo, and I know we'll make that happen because I'm going to make sure it's early. You catch me early, and I'll block off a weekend to go because I have points with Southwest, so that should be fine. But I really think that folks like you and Brandon who have worked in, like I said, these kind of secondary but related industries to hunting and fishing that are offshoots of it, that also face similar attacks to hunting and fishing. We need to capture those people and be a resource to them because they have crossover with us and we could have crossover with them. There's no reason to not be working with more people who are like-minded, who could, offer more, bring more to the conversation, to the organization, what have you. And so I'm all about crossover. Like I love to look for different connections and different interests to work with because, attacks in one way are not isolated. Attack on our lifestyle is not isolated to us. There are attacks similarly on ranching and rodeo. Rodeo is facing the same opponents like we are. It's these animal rights activists who want to stop rodeo altogether.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think I've mentioned that on at least one, if not a couple of our podcasts. We've had people that have agreed the same way. It's just I want to say it's just the lifestyle of doing it yourself, providing for yourself, earthy, human. There's hardly a way to explain it altogether, but a lot of those characteristics and those beliefs and that's very solid in both industries. And I think that a lot of the people who are professional rodeo athletes are the ones who are out there, going to Africa, and they have the means during the off season to go hunting and fishing and even on their own property, especially here in Texas. I know a lot of guys that rodeo that hunt here in Texas and have their own properties and things like that. So yeah, there's definitely crossover and there's an opportunity there to gain the support and, spread the word on both sides. But it has been an absolute pleasure to finally get you on.
Myself.
No, we talked about so much and I'm sitting here thinking, how am I going to do this intro? Well, this is going to be fun to, we've got some great topics. I was marking some clips throughout the whole process. So I'm excited to get this out to our audience and I want them to know where to find you. So kind of tout about your own podcast real quick and where they can find you and then your Instagram and other profiles that you'd like to feature.
Obviously, I talk way too long and thank you for letting me chime in on these different issues. But briefly or more succinctly, I have a website, GabriellaHoffman.com. It's an incubator to find all my links. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. And I have my own podcast, District of Conservation, where I chime in on all these different like public policy issues, but I also have interviews and candid conversations with people, newsmakers who are established, up and comers, because I feel like a lot of these like more established podcasts or these really corporate podcasts now, they have their own kind of repertoire and they don't really like to have outsiders come in. And I'm like, again, I don't want to be a gatekeeper. I want to be someone who could open the floodgates to new, interesting perspectives or change makers or people who really ought to be saying something and recognized. And so I'm doing my part to open the gates on gatekeeping and shine a light on different issues and highlight unique people who are doing something positive, whether it's through journalism or through policymaking or running an operation like a ranching or farming operation or outfitting business. So many different people, so many fascinating conservationists out there, and I try to do my best to tell their story. So it's been wonderful, Megan, to chat with you here on your podcast. I really thank you for the opportunity. You do great work, and I'm equally admirable of what you and Brandon do. So you guys are phenomenal, and I'm glad we're friends. It's just a match made in heaven in that regard.
I completely agree. I'm so glad it's so full circle having you on our podcast because we didn't even have a podcast when we came on your podcast. So been very exciting. And so we'll have to do another episode later down the road. And I know there's always something to talk about in your realm, and we'll be keeping in touch. And I'm excited about South Carolina. That's going to be such a fun trip.
Well, we're definitely going to get together beforehand to do
Houston.
rodeo.
Yes.
And maybe if and when rodeo happens, we can fit in some fishing, because I told you before we went to recording, I've never actually fished in Texas. So I need to remedy that if I don't do it this fall.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. As soon as we get the expo dates for the Ranching and Wildlife Expo, I will send them to you and we will base everything around that schedule.
Beautiful. Thank you, Megan. It's a pleasure, and happy Independence Day.
Happy Independence Day. Have a great weekend.